The other night, Joan and I sat down and talked about her dying in pain. And we discussed, as I remember, three alternatives. One was to put up the things and possibly die in suffering. A second possibility was to go to England and receive heroin. And a third possibility was suicide.
Not everybody that has cancer, Joan, when he is terminal with this cancer, necessarily has pain.
Can you predict whether there will be pain or not?
In your case, I think there is a reasonably good possibility that pain may never be a problem.
I don't feel good.
You in pain?
Yeah, it's better, but not good enough. I mean, it's better down than up. But like, the pain today is the really very bad, almost as bad as the pain I had last December when I was back in the hospital. It's just about as bad. You know, like, on a scale from 0 to 10, it's, if that was a 9, this is like an 8.
Joan Robinson, suffering from cancer, lived with unremitting chronic pain for the months and years of her illness.
And that pain went away by itself.
Her husband, Eric, shared that pain. It clouded their personal lives and their work lives. The pain undermined their zest, compromised their ability to care for each other, took over their lives. Joan and her doctors explored many kinds of medication. Sometimes the drugs worked. But Joan Robinson was often isolated, driven back on her own resources, and at times she found them wanting. It was Christmas. Joan and Eric had planned to go caroling. Instead, Joan developed severe pain, acute pain unlike any she had known before. She was admitted to University Hospital, Boston, on Christmas Eve, an emergency admission.
You know, she was fine last night, very nice evening, and then she was in such violent pain that, you know, there's absolutely nothing one could do.
That night, Eric went home alone.
To be back in the hospital where just the blankness of the walls, the noises in the night, and damn it, it's Christmas.
I'm Meryl Streep. We're going to talk about a difficult subject, but one none of us are strangers to. As Albert Schweitzer wrote, the fellowship of those who have known pain is universal. Having experienced pain, you would think that it was a fact, like a rock, hard, unyielding, implacable. But it's not that way. Pain is the body's cry of distress, but it's heard in the brain. The state of our minds, as well as of our bodies, influences the perception of pain. Consequently, there are many strategies for dealing with it, and they're often complex. But we now know enough about the management of pain to believe that nobody needs suffer endlessly and without relief. The Robinsons, whom we've met, and their doctors, agreed to permit film crews to record their bouts with pain because they hoped to make a statement which would be socially and medically valuable. The scenes were filmed as they occurred. Joan Robinson smokes occasionally in them. It was a lifelong habit. To help set Joan's experience of pain in perspective and to learn how we might cope with our own pain, we interviewed a number of experts.
The real differences between acute pain and chronic pain are that in acute pain, it suddenly has happened. It usually has a physical evidence of a pain where you've acutely injured yourself. In chronic pain, it's a pain that's left behind when often the acute injury has cleared.
Dr. Kathleen Foley, director of the Pain Research Center at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York City.
So that you're not only dealing with the pain, but the suffering that you've gone through with that particular pain.
Frequently, there are little battles that go on between the hospital staff and the patient demanding...
Dr. Alvin Poussant, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and Associate in Psychiatry at the Judge Baker Guidance Center in Boston.
So on. The other thing that goes on, unfortunately, is sometimes the only way that the patients can get attention from the hospital staff is to have pain.
If the person is still in pain and the medication has been given and is not due to be given again, there are a few things a nurse can do.
Judith Nierenberg, RN, Coordinator of Continuing Education in Nursing at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York.
Having the patient relax may alleviate the pain.
We approach pain in a hospice somewhat differently from the way pain is approached in other healthcare settings.
We turn to Dr. William Fisher of the Yale University Medical School and Deputy Medical Director of the Connecticut Hospice for an insight into pain management of the terminally ill.
First and foremost, when we think of pain in a hospice, we use the concept of total pain, recognizing that there are many facets that pain has.
Many of the authorities explained that an exaggerated fear of pain might be what causes an exaggerated experience of pain. But pain is real, and Joan Robinson's suffering besieged her. She was alternately accepting and anguished, trusting and doubting.
I mean, when we sat in his office and said that we wanted to prepare for this that time, and we asked him about heroin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He said, first of all, you may not have any pain. And I just sort of said to myself, oh, yes. Mm-hmm. I didn't really believe that.
When one has to deal with patients with chronic pain, one of the major issues has to be that the doctor has to accept that the patient is in pain, and that with the patient, you're going to enter into a union to help ameliorate that pain, oftentimes never eliminate it, but teach the patient how to deal with it.
I called him last week to say, let's get on with doing something about this, because the pain was so bad, and he said, no, we got to give the medicine a chance.
Those particular patients with chronic pain are almost considered the hateful patient. The doctor doesn't know what to do with them, how to treat them, how to respond to them. And that's a rather significant problem when you're sick and need a physician to care for you.
I don't want to be a pest, but I want to get this taken care of as soon as possible.
Well, then phone him.
And since most physicians are in the business of helping individuals, being confronted with that chronic problem makes it difficult for them to relate to the patient. It at times makes them take out their anger on the patient. It at times almost forces them to neglect some of the problems that the patient has that might be helped. And it can be very difficult for the physician to even recognize that he's doing it to that patient.
Hi, Peter Boston, John Robinson. Hi. I call because the pain is steadily getting worse all the time. And I was wondering whether, I see. Well, on the other hand, yesterday, I don't think I took any pain medication, and I felt real tired. Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
For the patient that's in pain, and his physician does not appear to be responding to the complaints of pain that he has, that patient has several options. One is to sit the doctor down and say, you're not paying attention to my pain. What can I do about it? What can you do about it? What should I be doing differently? If that doctor refuses to propose another approach, then with the patient who's in acute pain, I think the patient himself can suggest, well, why can't I have more pain medication that will temporarily relieve my pain?
She's feeling good, I think, or relatively good, because of this drug that she's on at the moment, which is giving her a bit of a lift. But I think that her frame of mind and general feeling at the moment is very dependent on the medication.
Medication helps, but chronic pain is always in the background. At times, the patient can forget it, but there are also times when the pain dominates. These wide swings create another kind of suffering.
There's no question in my mind that psychological stress and tension increases the subjective feeling of pain. If you're under stress and pressure, that pain becomes magnified and may feel more severe because you're not feeling as good about your whole life.
I simply couldn't get the ear of a waiter at all. That is, nobody came to see who had got a reservation and who hadn't got a reservation, right? We must have waited another, once we did find a chap, we must have waited another, half an hour to three-quarters of an hour to get a table. Right? Of course, Joan just simply can't take this kind of thing nowadays. But it's just an interesting example of how things that are inconvenient in normal life, you know, in the ordinary course of events for you and me, just gets that much worse.
But I don't know, once having gotten out, I hate to give up. You know how I am.
Yeah, but you must learn to give up. I mean, it's because really that's stoicism ain't achieving anything under those circumstances.
I know, I realize that.
And I think there have been many examples of people who, when they feel better emotionally, get over their depression, will not feel the same kind of pain. It will even decrease in intensity and occasionally may disappear if this stress was contributing to it in a major way.
I'm in almost constant pain. And at night, it keeps me from getting to sleep. And I just thought, well, what's the point of living? And this is the turning point, and I've had it. That's the feeling I had. I was really depressed. Now I feel better. I mean, that's the pattern, up and down.
See, there's no way really to judge subjective pain, and I think sometimes health professionals, in trying to think in a quantitative way about pain, think that they can judge how much pain a patient is having by the extent of the disorder or the pathology in the person. And I don't think that you can really do that.
To help deal with the reality of pain, doctors call upon a complex array of drugs. They've learned that when drugs are given in anticipation of pain, medication seems most effective. People have the right to question the appropriateness of their treatment.
The question has come up about dying of solid tumor cancer in this country with pain. And it appears to me, from what I've read and heard, that it is very common to die in considerable pain, and that it is hard to get adequate pain medication in the United States.
Since we all fear addiction, as we know it on the streets of our major cities, and since Americans are very much set against that, and since narcotic drugs can produce addiction, this is the major rationale for not using these drugs in patients with chronic pain.
I think we're quite conditioned to the idea that we give a patient just as much pain medicine as is necessary. Now, I know what you're talking about, and there's no question but that there is truth to the idea that many doctors and nurses and staff people in medical centers feel a great reluctance to hand out, say, narcotic medications freely, imagining that somehow we use as little of this as possible because we don't want a patient to get bound up or even addicted.
We've been very interested in the problem of how long can a patient take a narcotic drug, and will that immediately imply that he will become addicted or psychologically dependent on the drug. And our own experience has been is that doctors do not addict patients with narcotic drugs, that most patients who take narcotic analgesics for their pain can, when the pain is properly treated, often come off their medication easily. They have no interest in taking the drug except to relieve their pain, and they do not enter into the problems of becoming addicted to that medication.
But the pain is definitely getting worse and worse and worse.
The one problem with chronic pain is that it takes the control away from the patient. There's this external force that's producing a significant pain in the patient and a terrible experience for the patient that they can't cope with. And getting them back on top and getting them back to thinking that they're in control and can minimize the pain at times is really the most important aspect for the care of many patients.
You all right?
It's been found that pain relief is most effective when patients themselves are involved in their therapy.
there are self-help groups for patients who have chronic pain of some type. There are people or groups of people who get together, for instance, who have low back pain to talk about the problems they have. Many hospitals are beginning to encourage that type of group formation and communication with their patients. In addition, hospitals are now setting up pain clinics for people to attend.
Pain clinics recommend many strategies for dealing with non-acute pain. In addition to medication, they offer various physical therapy approaches, including exercise and massage. Other methods employ electrical stimulation to relax muscles, and some physicians recommend acupuncture. Another series of approaches, like biofeedback and meditation, involve using our minds to help the body relax and relieve pain.
You inhale and exhale, but you become aware of your exhale. And as you exhale, you say the number 1, or you think you're aware of 1. And you do it for 20 minutes.
And all of the approaches that one uses in dealing with patients with chronic pain is to allow them to keep functioning, to allow them to interact with their family members on a normal basis.
She wanted to learn some Italian.
Because it's not just the problem of that individual, but it's the problem and the family's problem.
There's something terribly destructive about being in a situation where you feel you really can't help in any very constructive way. I mean, sometimes one can...
You can always do something, can't you?
Well, I mean, it's fine if you think so, but sometimes you feel, I can't do anything. I just don't know what to do. I mean, I just don't know what to say, do, or where to put myself here to be of any effect whatsoever. It's useless.
When someone that you know has chronic pain, that particular pain has changed their life and often yours if it's your husband or wife. They become rather complaining all of the time. They stop relating to you, relating to their friends. They stay home. And that affects how you look at that pain.
It makes a lot of difference to me how Joan is. And even Joan doesn't know many times how depressed I am, because I don't always show her. I mean, if, you know, I'll walk out of the room, you know, after helping with something, and she'll go to sleep, and I'll go off and sometimes and sit in the porch outside there and be really thoroughly miserable. So, you know, any more than I know always when Joan is in pain, but Joan doesn't always know how, you know, just battered occasionally, I feel.
By the way, my pain is much better now. I feel kind of tired, but in a good way, you know.
Yeah.
Relaxed.
I think that the therapist can help the patient examine their life to see how the pain may be used in their family, how people are reacting to them, whether they're using it in any way as a defense mechanism, whether they're using it in some way to avoid other situations or responsibilities that they need to cope with. It can be helpful in that way.
Pain is complex, involving body and mind. But because we're human beings, the setting in which we experience pain also affects us. The bureaucracy of the hospital can be as traumatic as pain itself. People must learn to assert themselves.
There are times when the person is in severe pain and the expectations on the part of the staff should be very different. The staff should be much more understanding, much more sympathetic. They should not expect that the person who is suffering will be particularly respectful or sensitive of the staff's needs. In that situation, the staff should be particularly responsive to the needs of the person.
Is there somebody else that could do it? Because it's very painful, and you've tried 3 times.
The nurse should not become angry with the patient. The patient is suffering. The nurse should be understanding and sympathetic of the patient's problem and shouldn't leave it there. The nurse should try to resolve the situation by calling the physician.
There are some people who are very good at drawing blood and some who aren't. Now, I have had so much blood drawn because I've been ill for so long and have needed it, that what's happened is that my skin has toughened and my veins have gotten thinner, so that each time it gets harder.
If the situation seems difficult to resolve, there is a hierarchy in the hospital. If the nurse is unresponsive to discussions and requests for change in her behavior, you can go to the person who's in charge of the floor, and that's usually called the head nurse or the charge nurse. And that person should be able to resolve the problem. If not, there's generally a nursing supervisor who is that person's boss. That person should be able to resolve it, and one can go on up the hierarchy all the way to the director of nursing if that's necessary.
Last night I thought I was really gonna die, and I don't care. I didn't care. If I had died, I wouldn't have cared. All I wanted them to do was get me out of pain.
Sometimes the complaint of pain must be heard to mean other things. Suffering is often more than physical. It often reflects the patient's sense of fear or neglect.
The nurse really needs to be the patient's advocate, report to the physician how the patient's feeling, how long the medication is lasting, how inadequate it is, and really be the patient's advocate.
Actually, right now, you don't need to take any of those, including the chlorambucil and the Decadron, because we're going to give you any of that that's really essential, you know, by
I couldn't sleep last night. I don't know whether that was partly from the pain. I awful like pains. But I thought if I only could have had some sleeping med, maybe it would have, or a Plastidil, you know, something.
Well, Joan, you see, we know we're going to have problems from time to time, right? We've talked about all that.
It's foolish to expect someone who is racked with physical pain to have any capacity to approach the social or emotional or spiritual problems that he's feeling. If his physical pain is well controlled, he can begin to think about and talk about and get the rest of his house in order.
The original reason for forming a pain clinic was that patients with chronic pain were often mistreated when they went to a series of general physicians. So that it was felt that if these patients, who often have multiple medical problems, psychiatric problems, orthopedic problems, could be seen in a center where, which is now called a pain clinic, where available to them would be the expertise of several physicians, they could then gain the benefit of a group decision on what was the best course of therapy.
I think for too long, hospitals used to kind of reject people with pain that they couldn't find a so-called organic cause for, and kind of treat them like they were nuts or fakers or malingerers. And I think that now they're beginning to see the full dimension and range of the types of problems that are involved in pain and pain relief. So I hope to see some improvement in the care of people with chronic pain disorders.
I'll bring it to you, John.
I think anything that will alleviate pain, whether it's a hairdresser, a colored television, you know, a lover, anything that can diminish pain, and all of these things really do play a part.
Hi.
Hi. Joan, you popped in, did you?
I popped in. Said I'd drop in, yeah.
Are you in the middle of something? Or
No, I was just looking at some pictures, trying to decide which ones to have prints made of for Christmas presents.
Patients are urged to find their own technique for managing stress and pain. Writer-editor Norman Cousins came up with a unique solution when he was seriously ill.
Norman Cousins decided that if stress could be bad for you, then laughter could be good. And he had a movie projector brought into his room. He decided to hire a private duty nurse. He felt he needed a private duty nurse. He had a projector, and he looked at films from candid camera, and he laughed, and he laughed, and he attributes his laugh therapy, he attributes his recovery in part to his positive feelings resulting from his laugh therapy.
I had a beer, because Sandy told me once that I also have this pain, which sometimes they think it's a hiatus hernia, you know, they don't know what it is. And her mother has a hiatus hernia. She said beer is good for it. So I ordered a beer. It did help that pain. That pain did go away. That one.